The cry in the grass. Wade Harlan thought the Texas heat was playing tricks on him until he heard it again. A baby's cry, raw and desperate, cutting through the drought-scorched silence of Willow Creek. What he found in that wooden crate, hidden in the tall grass like a shameful secret, would shatter everything he thought he knew about grief, redemption, and the monsters who hide behind respectability. Because the dying infant reaching for him with sunburned fingers wasn't lost. She was thrown away. And the man who ordered it done sits in the finest house in town, wearing a judge's robe and a smile that has fooled everyone for decades. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Maisie's story travels. And if you believe some battles are worth fighting no matter the cost, hit that like button and stay with me until the end. The fence line stretched endlessly under a sky bleached white by heat. Wade Harlan sat his horse with the stillness of a man who had forgotten how to hurry, his shadow a dark slash across dirt that hadn't seen rain in 63 days. The land around Willow Creek had turned mean, grass brittle as old bone, water holes reduced to cracked mud, cattle standing hollow-eyed in whatever shade they could find. But Wade had learned to live with mean. Mean didn't ask questions. Mean didn't expect anything from you except survival. He was 45 years old and looked every day of it. The sun had carved lines deep around his eyes, and his hands bore the scars of a lifetime working rope and wire and unforgiving wood. Those same hands had built a house once, painted a nursery yellow, carved a rocking horse from cottonwood. Those same hands had clawed through smoking timber trying to reach voices that had already gone silent. That was 4 years ago, 4 years since the fire. 4 years since he'd buried a wife and a 6-year-old boy in the cemetery on the hill where the wind never stopped blowing. Wade didn't think about it much anymore. Thinking was dangerous. Thinking led to whiskey, and whiskey led to standing in that cemetery at midnight talking to headstones like they could answer back. So he worked instead, fixed fence, moved cattle, rode the property line every day like a man patrolling a border between the living and the dead. He was checking the tension on a wire splice when he heard it. At first he thought it was a coyote. They made all kinds of sounds, especially when the heat drove them half mad. But this wasn't a coyote. This was something else, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up and his horse's ears swivel forward. It was a cry, high and thin and desperate, a baby's cry. Wade went absolutely still. The sound came again, weaker this time, drifting across the scorched grass from somewhere near the dry creek bed. His horse shifted nervously, sensing something wrong in the air. "Easy," Wade murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the horse or himself. He dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. The crying had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse, thick and waiting, like the moment before a storm breaks. Wade left the horse ground-tied and walked toward the sound, his hands loose at his sides, every sense suddenly sharp in a way they hadn't been in years. The grass was waist-high here, turned gold and brittle by the drought. It whispered against his jeans as he moved through it, eyes scanning the ground. The creek bed was 30 yards ahead, a shallow depression where water used to run clear over smooth stones. Now it was just dust and dead branches. Then he saw it, a wooden crate, the kind used for shipping freight, half hidden in the grass about 10 feet from the creek bed. It was maybe 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, with gaps between the slats. Someone had dragged it here. He could see the furrow in the dirt where it had been pulled off the main road. Wade's heart was hammering now, a sensation so unfamiliar it felt like someone else's pulse. He approached the crate like it might explode, each step deliberate and slow. When he got close enough, he saw the smears on the wood, rust-colored, old blood maybe, or something worse. He knelt beside the crate, his knees cracking in protest. The lid was nailed shut, but the wood was cheap pine, already splintering in the heat. Wade pulled his work knife from his belt and wedged it under the lid. The nails shrieked as they pulled free, and the sound seemed to echo across the empty land. The lid came off. For a moment, Wade couldn't process what he was seeing. A baby lay inside, curled on her side on a scrap of dirty blanket. She was maybe 9 or 10 months old, her skin sunburned and peeling, her lips cracked and bleeding. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing so shallow he could barely see her chest moving. She wore a stained nightgown, and someone had tied a scrap of cloth around her wrist like a bracelet. No note, no name, nothing. Just a baby in a box left to die in the Texas sun. Something cracked open inside Wade's chest, something he'd thought was sealed shut forever. He reached into the crate with hands that shook so badly he could barely control them. The baby was burning up, her skin radiating heat like a coal. He lifted her out carefully, cradling her against his chest, and she was so light it terrified him. "I got you," he whispered, his voice rough with disuse. "I got you now." The baby's eyes fluttered open. They were blue, pale blue like a winter sky, and they looked right at him with a kind of desperate trust that broke something in him he didn't know was still intact. Her lips moved. A sound came out, barely a whisper. "Mama." Wade felt his knees try to give out. He locked them, holding the baby tighter, and looked around wildly like someone might appear to explain this nightmare. But there was nothing. Just the sun and the silence and a dying child in his arms. He didn't think. He ran. The horse shied when Wade came crashing through the grass, but years of training held. Wade hauled himself into the saddle one-handed, the baby clutched against his chest with his other arm. He kicked the horse into a gallop before his boots were fully in the stirrups. The town of Willow Creek was 3 miles away. Wade covered it in 15 minutes, the horse's hooves throwing up clouds of dust as they thundered down the main road. People stopped and stared as he passed, a wild-eyed cowboy with a baby in his arms, riding like all the devils of hell were on his heels. He didn't stop until he reached Dr. Grant Morrow's office on the corner of Main and 2nd. Wade practically fell off the horse, stumbled up the steps, and kicked the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. The doctor was with a patient, a woman with her arm in a sling, but he took one look at Wade and the bundle in his arms and went pale. "Dear God," Morrow breathed. "She's dying," Wade said flatly. "Found her in a crate out past Willow Creek. She's burning up. Hasn't had water in, I don't know how long." Morrow was already moving, clearing a table with a sweep of his arm. "Put her down, carefully." Wade laid the baby on the table and stepped back, his hands still shaking. The doctor's examination was swift and grim. He checked her pulse, listened to her heart, peeled back her eyelids to look at her pupils. His face was a mask of professional control, but Wade saw the flash of anger in his eyes. "Someone left her to die," Morrow said quietly, reaching for a basin of water and clean cloths. "This is deliberate." "I know." "How long was she out there?" "I don't know. Hours, maybe longer." The doctor soaked a cloth and began carefully cleaning the baby's face, dripping water onto her cracked lips. "She's severely dehydrated, heat stroke, sunburn over most of her body. If you'd found her an hour later—" He didn't finish the sentence. Wade watched the baby's chest rise and fall with painful slowness. "Will she make it?" "I don't know," Morrow said honestly. "The next few hours will tell us. I'll do everything I can, but she's in bad shape, Wade, real bad." Wade nodded once, sharply, and pulled a chair up to the table. He sat down and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on the baby's face. "What are you doing?" Morrow asked. "Staying." "Wade, this could take all night, maybe longer. You should—" "I'm staying," Wade said again, and there was something in his voice that made the doctor go quiet, something raw and broken and absolutely immovable. Morrow looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll need help. Let me send someone to fetch—" "Claire," Wade said abruptly. "Send for Claire Sutton." The doctor blinked in surprise. Claire Sutton was the school teacher, a quiet widow who lived in a small house on the edge of town. She'd been kind to Wade after the fire, bringing him meals he didn't eat and sitting with him in silence when words felt impossible. But that was years ago, and Wade had pulled away from everyone since then. "You sure?" Morrow asked. "She'll know what to do," Wade said. "And the baby, she needs someone gentle." The doctor studied Wade's face, seeing something there that made him nod again. "I'll send my assistant. She'll be here in 10 minutes. Morrow was right. 9 minutes later, the door opened and Claire Sutton stepped through, her face flushed from hurrying, her dark hair coming loose from its pins. She was 38 years old, with steady brown eyes and capable hands that had soothed crying children and bandaged scraped knees for more than a decade. She took one look at the baby on the table and went completely still. Who would do this? She whispered. That's what we're going to find out, Wade said quietly, but right now she needs help. Claire moved to the table without another word. She had a way with children. Everyone in Willow Creek knew it. Her own daughter had died of fever 7 years ago, and her husband had followed 6 months later from a heart that just gave out. But Claire had kept teaching, kept showing up, kept finding ways to pour her grief into caring for other people's children. She reached out and gently stroked the baby's cheek with one finger. The baby's eyes fluttered open again, and something remarkable happened. The fear in those blue eyes eased just a fraction. The tiny hand lifted, fingers stretching toward Claire's. Claire caught that small hand in hers, and the baby's fingers wrapped around her thumb with surprising strength. "Hello, sweetheart," Claire said softly. "You're safe now. We've got you." The baby made a sound, not quite a cry, not quite a sigh, just a small noise of exhausted relief. And then, impossibly, her lips curved into the faintest ghost of a smile before her eyes drifted closed again. Wade felt something shift in his chest, something that hurt and healed at the same time. "She needs a name," Claire said, still holding the baby's hand. "Even if it's just for now, she needs something to call her own." Wade looked at the tiny face, at the sunburned skin and the cracked lips and the pale blonde hair matted to her head. He thought about the word she'd said out there in the grass, the one word she'd managed to push past her dying lips. "Maisie," he said quietly. "Maisie June." Claire looked up at him, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Shared grief. Shared determination that this child would not become another name on a headstone. "Maisie June," Claire repeated, and smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. "That's perfect." Dr. Morrow worked through the afternoon and into the evening. He got fluids into Maisie drop by drop, cleaned her wounds, applied salve to her burns. Claire stayed beside her, singing soft songs and stroking her hair when she whimpered. Wade stayed in his chair, silent and watchful, like a guard dog that had found something worth protecting. As the sun set and the office filled with amber light, Maisie's breathing began to even out. The terrible heat faded from her skin. Her color improved from gray to pink. Around 8 o'clock, she opened her eyes fully for the first time and looked around with what might have been curiosity. Claire offered her a bottle of diluted milk and water, and Maisie drank like she'd been wandering a desert for days, which, Wade supposed, she had been. "She's going to make it," Morrow said finally, sagging against the wall with relief. "I can't believe it, but she's going to make it." Wade closed his eyes and breathed for what felt like the first time in hours. But before anyone could celebrate, the door opened and Sheriff Tom Brackett walked in. He was a big man, 50 years old, with a star on his chest and a face that gave nothing away. He'd been sheriff in Willow Creek for 15 years, and he ran the county with a steady hand and a reputation for fairness. He looked at the baby on the table, then at Wade, then at Claire. His expression darkened. "Heard you found something out at Willow Creek," Brackett said. "Want to tell me about it?" Wade described finding the crate, the condition of the baby, the ride into town. He spoke flatly, without emotion, but his hands curled into fists on his knees. Brackett listened without interrupting. When Wade finished, the sheriff pulled out a small notebook and made a few notes, his pencil scratching loudly in the quiet room. "Anyone see you out there?" Brackett asked. "No, just me and the buzzards." "Any tracks, signs of who left her?" "Drag marks from the road, boot prints, but the ground was too dry to make out much detail. Whoever it was knew what they were doing." Brackett's jaw tightened. "This is attempted murder. Maybe conspiracy, depending on who's involved. I'll ride out at first light, see what I can find. In the meantime," he looked at Maisie. "What happens to her?" "She stays here tonight," Morrow said. "Under observation. After that," he glanced at Wade and Claire. "She stays with me," Wade said immediately. Brackett raised an eyebrow. "You?" "Me." "Wade, you live alone on a cattle ranch. You work 16-hour days. You really think—" "I'll help," Claire said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. She lifted her chin, meeting their gazes steadily. "I'll stay at the ranch as long as she needs me. I can take a leave from teaching. School's out for summer anyway. Between Wade and me, she'll be cared for." Brackett studied them both for a long moment. Wade could see the sheriff working through the implications, the town gossip this would generate. The questions people would ask. A widowed cowboy and a widowed school teacher living together under one roof with a mysterious baby? Willow Creek would talk about nothing else for months. Wade didn't care. Let them talk. All right, Brackett said finally. But I want to be clear. This baby is evidence in a criminal investigation. Nobody takes her anywhere without clearing it with me first. And if I find out who's responsible, his voice went cold, they're going to wish I hadn't. The sheriff left, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Morrow checked Maisie one more time, then announced he needed to step out for supplies. That left Wade and Claire alone with the baby, who had fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep. Claire sat in the chair beside the table, still holding Maisie's hand. Wade stood by the window, staring out at the darkening street. "Wade," Claire said softly. He turned to look at her. "Why did you ask for me?" It was a fair question. They'd barely spoken in 2 years despite living in the same small town. Wade had built walls around himself after the fire, and Claire had respected them even when it clearly hurt her to do so. "Because," Wade said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "when I held her, she was so scared. And I knew she needed someone who could make her feel safe, someone gentle, someone who knows how to love broken things." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "We're all broken, Wade." "I know." He looked at Maisie, at the rise and fall of her small chest. "But some of us get a chance to protect something that can still be fixed." They sat in silence for a while, listening to Maisie breathe. Outside, Willow Creek settled into night. Somewhere out there, someone was waiting to see if the baby they'd thrown away would die quietly. Someone was sleeping soundly, thinking they'd gotten away with murder. Wade intended to prove them wrong. Around midnight, Morrow returned with blankets and supplies. He set up a small cot for Claire, insisting she try to rest. Wade refused to leave, so the doctor brought him coffee and a second chair. "You should know," Morrow said quietly, pouring coffee into tin cups. "People are already talking. News travels fast in a town this size." "Let them talk," Wade said. "It won't be kind talk, Wade. You and Claire, staying together at your ranch. There'll be assumptions, judgments." "We're keeping a child alive," Wade said flatly. "Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." Morrow smiled faintly. "Fair enough, but there's something else you should consider." He paused, his expression troubled. "A baby like this, abandoned, no family coming forward, she's going to draw attention, from the county, from people who might have influence." "What kind of people?" "The kind who don't like loose ends," Morrow said carefully. "Whoever left Maisie out there wanted her gone. If they find out she's alive—" He didn't finish the sentence. Wade's jaw tightened. "They'll have to go through me first." The doctor nodded slowly. "I figured you'd say that. Just be careful, Wade. Some battles can't be won with stubbornness alone." "Then I'll find another way to win them." Morrow clapped him on the shoulder and left them to their vigil. The night stretched long and quiet. Claire dozed on the cot, one hand still resting near Maisie's head. Wade sat in his chair by the window, drinking coffee gone cold, watching the empty street and thinking about boxes and tall grass. Around 3 a.m, Maisie woke crying. It was a thin, pitiful sound that had Claire on her feet instantly. She lifted the baby carefully, cradling her against her chest, and began to pace the room in a slow, swaying rhythm. "Shh, sweetheart," Claire murmured. "You're all right. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." Wade watched them, the gentle woman and the broken child, and felt something crack open inside him that he'd thought was permanently sealed. It wasn't hope, exactly. Hope was too fragile, too dangerous. But it was something. Some small acknowledgement that maybe the world still held moments worth witnessing. Maisie's crying faded to hiccups, then to silence. She tucked her face into Claire's neck and made a small, contented sound. Her hand came up and patted Claire's cheek clumsily, like she was testing whether this person was real. "That's right," Claire whispered. "I'm real. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Wade stood and moved closer, looking down at Maisie's face. In sleep, she looked impossibly young and impossibly old at the same time, like she'd seen things no baby should ever see. "Someone loved her once," Claire said quietly, reading his thoughts. "Look at her hair. It's been washed and brushed recently. And her nightgown, underneath the dirt, it's good quality fabric, hand-stitched. Wade hadn't noticed before, but Claire was right. This wasn't a child who'd been neglected from birth. This was a child who'd been cared for, loved even, before someone decided she was disposable. So what happened? Wade asked. I don't know, Claire said, but whatever it was recent, and it was bad enough that someone chose murder over alternatives. Wade thought about that, about the kind of secret that would drive someone to put a baby in a box and leave her to die, about the kind of power it would take to think you could get away with it. We need to be ready, he said quietly. When they find out she's alive, they're going to come for her. Claire looked up at him, her eyes steady despite the fear he could see in them. Then we'll be ready. They stayed awake together until dawn broke pink and gold over the rooftops of Willow Creek. Dr. Morrow arrived at first light to check on his patient, and he reported with obvious relief that Maisie had turned a corner. She was drinking, responsive, and showing no signs of infection. She's tougher than she looks, Morrow said, smiling as Maisie grabbed his stethoscope and tried to chew on it. Another few days under observation, then I think she can go home with you. Home. The word hit Wade harder than he expected. He'd stopped thinking of his ranch as home 4 years ago. It had just been a place to sleep between work shifts, a collection of empty rooms haunted by memories. But maybe, he thought, watching Claire make Maisie laugh with silly faces, maybe it could become something else. Sheriff Brackett arrived an hour later, his face grim. He'd ridden out to Willow Creek at sunrise and found exactly what Wade had described. The crate, the drag marks, boot prints too degraded to be useful. But he'd found something else, too. There was a wagon track, Brackett said, spreading a rough map on Morrow's desk. About 100 yards from where you found the crate, fresh enough that it hasn't been completely erased by the wind. 2 horses, heavy load, came from the direction of town, turned around, went back the same way. So someone drove out there specifically to dump her, Wade said. Looks like it. I followed the tracks back toward town, but they merged with the main road traffic about a mile out. Could have come from anywhere. Brackett rubbed his face tiredly. I put the word out. Anyone sees or hears anything suspicious, they're to report directly to me. But Wade, he hesitated. This kind of thing, leaving a baby to die, that takes a special kind of cold. Whoever did this, they're not going to just confess because I ask nicely. Then we make them confess, Wade said quietly. Brackett gave him a sharp look. We do this by the law, Wade. I know how you're feeling, but vigilante justice doesn't fly in my county. I'm not talking about vigilante justice, Wade said. I'm talking about finding the truth and making sure it sees daylight. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but you stay out of the investigation. Let me handle it. Wade didn't answer, which was answer enough. Over the next 3 days, Willow Creek buzzed with rumors. The story of the baby in the box spread through town like wildfire, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Some said Wade had found her in the middle of the desert, half eaten by coyotes. Others claimed she'd been wrapped in a Confederate flag and left at the cemetery gates. The truth was dramatic enough, but people always wanted more. And underneath the gossip ran a darker current, questions about who the baby's parents were, why she'd been abandoned, and what Wade Harlan and Claire Sutton thought they were doing playing house together. Wade ignored it all. He spent his days at the ranch preparing the spare bedroom that had sat empty for 4 years. Claire helped, bringing curtains she'd sewn herself and a small cradle she'd found at the church donation room. Together they scrubbed and painted and made the space bright and clean and safe. At night they took turns sitting with Maisie at the doctor's office, feeding her, singing to her, teaching her to trust again. And Maisie responded. She began to smile more readily, to reach for them when she was scared, to laugh when Claire tickled her feet. She was a quick learner, already trying to pull herself up on furniture, babbling sounds that were almost words. But she never said mama again. Not once. On the 4th day, Dr. Morrow cleared Maisie for release. Wade and Claire brought her back to the ranch in a wagon, cushioned with every blanket they could find. The ride was slow and careful, and Maisie seemed fascinated by everything. The horses, the sky, the endless stretch of dry grass. When they reached the ranch house, Wade carried her inside and set her down gently in the cradle Claire had prepared. Maisie looked around the room with wide eyes, taking in the yellow curtains, the carved wooden horse on the shelf, the quilt with stars stitched into the pattern. Then she looked up at Wade and Claire, standing together in the doorway, and she smiled. It was the kind of smile that made Wade understand why people had children in the first place. Pure and uncomplicated and full of trust that the world was good. He hoped like hell they could keep that smile intact. That night, after Maisie had fallen asleep and Claire had retired to the guest room, Wade stood on his porch and looked out at the dark land. Somewhere out there, someone was wondering if their secret had died in a wooden box. Someone was sleeping soundly, thinking they were safe. Wade intended to rob them of that peace, because he'd failed one child 4 years ago, failed to get there in time, failed to pull him from the flames, failed to be the father who saved his son. But Maisie June wasn't going to become another failure, another grave on a hill. She was going to live. She was going to grow up safe and loved and protected. And anyone who tried to stop that was going to learn exactly how dangerous a man with nothing left to lose could be. Wade Harlan had been hollowed out by fire once. But hollow things, he was learning, could be filled again. Sometimes with purpose, sometimes with fury. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, with something worth protecting more than your own broken heart. The first week passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Wade woke before dawn, checked the cattle, mended fence. Claire took care of Maisie during the day, feeding her, bathing her, teaching her to clap her hands and play peekaboo. In the evenings, they ate simple meals together at the kitchen table while Maisie banged a wooden spoon against her high chair and laughed at the noise. It was domestic in a way Wade hadn't experienced in 4 years, and it unsettled him as much as it comforted him. He caught himself listening for Claire's footsteps in the morning, anticipating the smell of coffee she made strong enough to strip paint. He noticed small things, the way she hummed while folding laundry, the patience in her voice when Maisie fussed, the strand of dark hair that always escaped her bun by noon. But beneath the surface calm, tension coiled tighter every day, because the questions everyone was asking weren't going away. Where did Maisie come from? Who were her parents? And why hadn't anyone come forward to claim her? On the 8th day, Sheriff Brackett rode out to the ranch just after breakfast. Wade saw him coming from the porch and felt his jaw tighten. The sheriff wouldn't make the trip unless he had news. "Morning, Tom," Wade said as Brackett dismounted. "Wade." The sheriff's face was carefully neutral, which meant trouble. "Claire inside?" "With the baby. Come on in." They found Claire in the front room, sitting on the floor with Maisie. The baby had discovered her own feet and was examining them with intense concentration, trying to fit her toes in her mouth. Claire looked up when the men entered, and Wade saw her smile fade at Brackett's expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. Brackett pulled off his hat and turned it in his hands. "Got a visit at the office this morning, from Judge Vernon Crow." The name landed like a stone in still water. Wade felt every muscle in his body go rigid. Claire's face went pale. Vernon Crow was the most powerful man in 3 counties. He'd served as circuit judge for 20 years, owned half the commercial property in Willow Creek, and had political connections that reached all the way to the state capitol. He was 62 years old, silver-haired and dignified, with a voice like aged whiskey and a reputation for absolute integrity. He was also, Wade had always thought, cold as a snake. "What did Crow want?" Wade asked quietly. Brackett looked uncomfortable. "He's heard about the baby. He wants to discuss the situation with you both. Said it's a matter of considerable delicacy." "Delicacy," Claire repeated, her voice tight. "A baby was left to die in a box, and he calls it delicate?" "Those weren't his exact words," Brackett said carefully, "but he made it clear this isn't a social call. He expects you at his house tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, both of you." Wade's hands curled into fists. "And if we refuse?" "Then he'll have the county take custody of Maisie, pending a full investigation into her origins and your suitability as guardians." Brackett's voice was flat. "He's got the legal authority to do it, Wade, and he's got friends who'll back whatever play he makes." Claire stood slowly, lifting Maisie into her arms. The baby immediately grabbed a fistful of her hair and tried to eat it. Why would Judge Crow care about one abandoned baby? He's never shown interest in county welfare cases before. "I don't know," Brackett admitted, "but I don't like it. The man doesn't make moves without a reason, and those reasons usually benefit Vernon Crow first, and everyone else distant second." He looked at Wade. "You want my advice?" Go to the meeting. Be respectful. Answer his questions. And for the love of everything, Wade, keep your temper in check. After Brackett left, Wade and Claire sat in heavy silence. Maisie had fallen asleep against Claire's shoulder, one small hand curled in the fabric of her dress. "We could run," Claire said quietly. Wade looked at her in surprise. "Take Maisie and leave. Tonight. Head west. Start over somewhere they'd never find us." Claire's voice was steady, but Wade could see the fear beneath it. "We could keep her safe that way." "We'd be running for the rest of our lives," Wade said. "And the minute they caught us, and they would catch us, we'd lose her anyway. Plus, we'd be fugitives." He shook his head. "No. We go to the meeting, we hear what Crow has to say, and then we decide." Claire nodded, though she didn't look convinced. "I don't trust him, Wade. Men like Vernon Crow don't summon people to their houses out of concern for a baby's welfare." "I know," Wade said grimly, "but we don't have a choice." The next morning dawned clear and hot. Wade put on his cleanest shirt and the suit jacket he'd worn to funerals. Claire dressed in a simple blue dress with her hair pinned neatly, and she wrapped Maisie in a white cotton gown that made her look like an angel. They rode to town in Wade's wagon, the silence between them thick with unspoken worry. Judge Crow's house sat on the hill overlooking Willow Creek, a 3-story mansion of white stone with columns and a wraparound porch. It was the kind of house that declared wealth and permanence, built to last generations. Wade had been inside exactly once, for a town meeting about water rights. The place had felt like a museum, beautiful and cold and untouchable. A housemaid answered their knock, a Mexican woman in her 40s with careful eyes and a tight mouth. She led them through a marble-floored hallway into a study lined with law books and dark wood. Judge Crow sat behind a massive desk, reviewing papers with the focused attention of a man used to power. He looked up when they entered and smiled. It was a practiced smile, warm and welcoming and completely empty. "Mr. Harlan? Mrs. Sutton. Thank you for coming." Crow gestured to 2 chairs positioned in front of his desk. "Please sit. Maria, bring coffee." The maid disappeared silently. Wade and Claire sat, and Claire settled Maisie on her lap. The baby looked around the room with interest, completely unaware of the tension crackling in the air. Crow's gaze landed on Maisie and lingered. Something flickered in his eyes. Wade couldn't quite name it, but it made his skin crawl. "So this is the child," Crow said softly. "I heard she was recovering, but I'm pleased to see it with my own eyes. Children are resilient creatures." "She has a name," Claire said firmly. "Maisie June." Crow's smile tightened fractionally. "Of course. Maisie. A lovely choice." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here." "The thought crossed our minds," Wade said. "I'll be direct then. This situation, a foundling child, no known parents, being cared for by 2 unmarried individuals living together, it presents certain complications, legal complications, social complications." Crow paused. "I'm concerned about the child's welfare and about protecting the reputations of everyone involved." "Our reputations aren't your concern," Wade said evenly. "But the child's welfare is," Crow countered smoothly. "As circuit judge, I have a responsibility to ensure that abandoned or orphaned children in this county are placed in appropriate homes, homes that can provide stability, proper supervision, and a moral environment." Claire's arms tightened around Maisie. "Are you suggesting we're providing an immoral environment?" "I'm suggesting that appearances matter, Mrs. Sutton. A widowed rancher and a widowed schoolteacher sharing a household with no legal arrangement, caring for a child of unknown origins. Surely you can see how that might invite scrutiny." "We're keeping her alive," Wade said, his voice hard. "That's what matters. Survival is the minimum standard, Mr. Harlan. But this child deserves more than minimum. She deserves a proper family, a married couple who can provide the structure and guidance she'll need." Crow paused, letting the implication sink in. "I've taken the liberty of speaking with several respectable families in the county who might be willing to adopt, people of standing and means." "No!" The word came from Claire, sharp and immediate. Crow's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Sutton, she stays with us," Claire said. "Maisie is bonded with us. We're the only family she knows. Taking her away now would be cruel." "Cruelty is a matter of perspective," Crow said mildly. Some might argue that allowing her to form attachments to temporary caregivers only to uproot her later is the greater cruelty. Better to make the transition now, while she's young enough to adapt. Wade leaned forward. You didn't bring us here to discuss adoption options. What do you really want? For just a moment, the pleasant mask slipped, and Wade saw something else underneath, something calculating and cold. Then Crow smiled again. Very perceptive. The truth is, I have information about this child's origins. Information that might prove disturbing to certain parties if it became public knowledge. The room went very still. What kind of information? Wade asked carefully. The kind best discussed in private, Crow said. Without the child present, Claire stood immediately. I'll wait outside. Maria will show you to the garden, Crow said, his eyes never leaving Wade. The roses are particularly beautiful this time of year. The maid reappeared as if summoned by thought and led Claire and Maisie away. Wade waited until the door closed before speaking. All right, we're alone. Talk. Crow stood and moved to the window, looking out over his manicured lawn. How much do you know about me, Mr. Harlan? You're a judge. You're rich. You're powerful. That about cover it? On the surface, yes, but power requires maintenance. It requires the careful management of reputation and the protection of certain interests. Crow turned to face him. I have a daughter, Mr. Harlan. Her name is Elise. She's 19 years old, beautiful, educated, and until recently, unmarried. Wade felt ice slide down his spine. Elise made a mistake, Crow continued. She became involved with an unsuitable young man. A drifter with no prospects, no family, no future. When I learned of the relationship, I ended it. Paid the boy to leave town and never return. Problem solved. He paused. Or so I thought. She was pregnant, Wade said flatly. She was pregnant, Crow confirmed. 9 months ago, she gave birth to a daughter. A child who should never have existed. A child whose very existence threatened everything I've built for my family. Wade's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. You left your own grandchild in a box to die. I did what was necessary to protect my daughter's reputation and her future, Crow said, his voice utterly calm. Elise is now engaged to a senator's son from Austin, a proper marriage to a proper family. That union is worth more than one illegitimate infant with no claim to respectability. She had a claim to life, Wade said, his voice shaking with fury. She was a baby, your blood. She was a mistake that needed correcting. Crow moved back to his desk, his movements precise and controlled. But here we are. The child survived, which complicates matters. However, it doesn't have to be a disaster. I'm prepared to offer you a substantial sum, let's say $5,000, in exchange for your silence and your cooperation. Cooperation meaning what? You sign over custody to a family of my choosing. Somewhere far from here, California perhaps, or Oregon. The child disappears into a new life with people who'll never know her origins. Elise's reputation remains intact. My family's standing remains secure, and you walk away a wealthy man. Crow smiled. Everyone wins. Wade stood slowly. He was trembling with the effort of keeping his hands at his sides instead of wrapping them around Crow's throat. You think I'd sell that baby? Wade asked, his voice deadly quiet. You think I'd let you erase her like she's some kind of embarrassment? I think you're a practical man who understands how the world works, Crow said. You can't keep her, Mr. Harlan. Even if you refuse my offer, I'll use every legal avenue available to remove that child from your custody. I have lawyers. I have judges who owe me favors. I can make your life very difficult. You already tried to kill her once, Wade said, and you failed. You think I'm going to help you finish the job? Crow's expression hardened. Don't be dramatic. I'm offering the child a good life with a respectable family. That's more than she would have had as the bastard daughter of a drifter and a foolish girl. Get out of my way, Wade said. Mr. Harlan, get out of my way before I do something we'll both regret. Crow studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. Wade walked to the door, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. You're making a mistake, Crow called after him. I always get what I want, Mr. Harlan, always. The only question is how much it costs everyone involved. Wade kept walking. He found Claire in the garden, sitting on a bench with Maisie in her lap. She looked up when he approached, and whatever she saw in his face made her go pale. "We're leaving," Wade said. "Now." They were halfway back to the ranch before Wade could speak coherently. He told Claire everything. Crow's daughter, the pregnancy, the deliberate abandonment, the offer to buy their silence. Claire listened with Maisie asleep against her shoulder, her face growing paler with each revelation. "He left his own grandchild to die," she whispered when Wade finished. "His own blood. And he'll do it again if we give him the chance," Wade said grimly. "We need to be ready, Claire. He's not going to let this go." "What can we do?" "You heard him. He has lawyers, connections, power. We're the people who saved her," Wade interrupted. "That has to count for something." But 3 days later, they learned exactly how much it counted. Sheriff Brackett arrived at the ranch with papers in his hand and misery written all over his face. Behind him rode 2 deputies and a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. "Wade," Brackett said heavily, "I'm sorry. I tried to fight this, but..." The man in the suit stepped forward. "Mr. Harlan? I'm attorney Robert Finch, representing Judge Vernon Crow in the matter of the minor child currently in your custody. I have a court order signed by Judge Hamilton of the District Court removing the child from your care pending a full investigation into her origins and your suitability as guardians." Claire appeared in the doorway holding Maisie. "No." "Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but the order is legal and binding. If you refuse to comply, the sheriff is authorized to take the child by force, and you'll both be held in contempt of court." "How did he get a judge to sign this?" Wade demanded. "We haven't had a hearing. We haven't had a chance to defend ourselves." Judge Hamilton reviewed the facts as presented and determined that the child's welfare required immediate intervention, Finch said smoothly. "You'll have an opportunity to contest the order at a formal hearing next month. Until then, the child will be placed in county custody at the Methodist orphanage in..." "No," Claire said again, backing into the house. Maisie, sensing her distress, began to cry. Brackett stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Claire, don't make this harder than it has to be. I don't want to see you arrested." "Then don't arrest me," Claire said, her voice breaking. "Tom, please. You know what this is. You know Crow is behind this. Are you really going to help him take this baby?" "I don't have a choice," Brackett said, and he sounded like a man watching his own integrity die. "The law is the law. The law is whatever Vernon Crow says it is," Wade said bitterly. But he put a hand on Claire's shoulder, feeling her shake beneath his touch. "Give her to me. Wade, give her to me," he repeated gently. "We can't fight them this way, not now." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she handed Maisie to Wade. The baby was crying in earnest now, confused and frightened by the tension in the air. Wade held her close, feeling her small heart racing against his chest. "It's all right, Maisie June," he murmured into her soft hair. "You're going to be all right." But when he handed her to the attorney's assistant, a stern-faced woman who held Maisie like she was a sack of flour, Maisie's crying became screaming. She reached back toward Wade and Claire, her face red and streaked with tears, calling out sounds that weren't quite words but carried the clear message of betrayal. Wade watched the wagon carry her away and felt something inside him turn to iron. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Brackett looked at him with worried eyes. "Wade, be careful. Crow is dangerous when he's threatened." "So am I," Wade said. "So am I." That night, the ranch house felt like a tomb. Claire sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing, tears running silently down her face. Wade stood at the window, watching the darkness, his mind working through possibilities and discarding them one by one. "We can't beat him legally," Claire finally said. "He owns the judges. He owns the lawyers. He probably owns half the county officials." "Then we don't fight him legally," Wade said. Claire looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean we find proof. Real proof that he ordered Maisie killed. We find witnesses. We build a case so strong that even Crow's money and connections can't bury it." Wade turned to face her. "And we make sure everyone in 3 counties knows exactly what kind of monster sits in that big house on the hill." "How?" Claire asked. "Everyone's too scared to talk. The people who work for him, the people who owe him money, the people whose careers he controls. They're not going to testify against Vernon Crow. Wade was silent for a moment. Then, what about his daughter, Elise? She's the baby's mother. If we could get her to tell the truth. She's locked away in that house like a prisoner, Claire said. You think Crow lets her talk to anyone he doesn't approve? You think she'd risk her engagement, her family, her entire life to save a baby she's been told is dead? She doesn't know Maisie is alive, Wade said slowly. Crow would have told her the baby died. Probably said it was merciful, that the child was too weak to survive. But if Elise knew the truth, if she knew her daughter was alive and being used as a pawn, that's a lot of ifs, Wade. It's all we've got. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of impossibility pressing down on them. Then Claire stood abruptly. The housemaid, she said. Wade looked at her questioningly. Maria, the woman who showed us to the garden, did you see her face when Crow was talking about the baby? She looked sick, like she knew something terrible and couldn't say it. Claire's voice gained strength. What if she knows what happened? What if she was there when they took Maisie away? Wade felt a spark of hope. You think she'd talk? I think she's afraid. But I also think she has a conscience. I saw it in her eyes. Claire grabbed her shawl. She goes to early mass at the Catholic Church every morning. I've seen her there when I walk past on my way to school. If we can catch her alone, away from Crow's house, it's worth a try, Wade said. The next morning, they were waiting outside St. Mary's Catholic Church when Maria emerged after Mass. She saw them and froze, fear flashing across her face. Please, Claire said quickly, stepping forward with her hands out in a peaceful gesture. We just want to talk. 5 minutes. Maria glanced around nervously. The street was mostly empty, just a few early risers heading to the general store. I cannot help you, she said, her English accented but clear. I have a family. I need my position. We know, Wade said gently. We're not asking you to testify or put yourself in danger. We just need to understand what happened. The truth. Maria's eyes filled with tears. You do not know what he is capable of, what he has done. We know he left a baby to die, Claire said quietly. We know he's trying to erase his own granddaughter like she never existed. If that doesn't make him a monster, what does? Maria looked at them for a long moment, clearly torn. Then she glanced around once more and gestured to a small park across the street. There. 5 minutes only. They sat on a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. Maria twisted her hands in her lap, her face etched with fear and something deeper, guilt, maybe, or shame. I was there, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The night the baby was born. Miss Elise, she labored for many hours, so much pain, but Judge Crow, he would not call the doctor. He said no one outside the family could know. Who helped with the delivery? Claire asked. Me and the cook, Mrs. Patterson. We did our best, but we are not trained. When the baby finally came, Maria's voice broke. She was so small, so perfect. Miss Elise, she cried and cried, holding her daughter. She named her Grace. She said it meant something beautiful from God. Wade felt his throat tighten. Maisie. Grace. 2 names for one stolen child. What happened then? He asked. Judge Crow took this baby, Maria said, tears streaming down her face now. He said the child could not stay, that she would ruin everything. Miss Elise begged him. She said she would do anything, give up anything, if he would just let her keep her baby, but he would not listen. Maria wiped her eyes with shaking hands. He gave the baby to a man, a stranger who came in the night. I heard them talking in the study. The judge said to take her far away and make sure nobody ever found her. And then... She couldn't continue. And then the man was supposed to kill her, Wade finished grimly. Maria nodded. I wanted to stop it. I swear I did, but I have 3 children of my own, and my husband is sick. If I lose my position, my family starves. I am a coward. You're not a coward, Claire said, taking Maria's hand. You're a survivor. But Maria, would you be willing to tell this story to the sheriff? To help us save that baby? If I do, Judge Crow will destroy me, Maria whispered. He will make sure I never work again. He might hurt my family. If you don't, Wade said quietly, an innocent child stays trapped in his web, and eventually he'll find a way to finish what he started. Maria closed her eyes. I do not know. I need time to think, to pray. We don't have much time, Claire said urgently. Every day that passes, Crow gets closer to making Maisie disappear for good. Please, Maria, you're the only witness we have. But Maria was already standing, backing away. I am sorry, I cannot. I wish I was brave enough, but I am not. She turned and hurried away, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders like armor against the weight of her own guilt. Wade and Claire sat in defeated silence. What now? Claire asked. Now, Wade said slowly, we find the man Crow hired. If Maria heard them talking, someone else might have too. Someone might know who he is, where he went. And maybe, just maybe, we can convince him to tell the truth about what he was paid to do. It was a thin hope, but it was all they had. And Wade Harlan had learned something important over 4 years of grief and isolation. Sometimes thin hope was enough to keep a man breathing long enough to find something worth fighting for. They had 3 weeks until the custody hearing. 3 weeks to find proof, build a case, and convince a judge that wasn't in Crow's pocket to give Maisie back. 3 weeks to save a child from the monster who wore respectability like a mask and wielded power like a weapon. Wade looked at Claire and saw his own determination reflected in her eyes. We're going to get her back, he said. Claire nodded. Whatever it takes. Neither of them mentioned the possibility of failure, because failure meant watching Vernon Crow win, and that was something Wade would die before allowing. The search for Crow's hired man proved harder than Wade expected. He started at the saloons, asking careful questions about strangers who'd passed through town 9 months ago. Most folks shook their heads or looked away, unwilling to get involved in anything that might circle back to Judge Crow. The few who remembered anything useful spoke in whispers, glancing over their shoulders like the judge himself might materialize from the shadows. There was a man, old Charlie Brennan finally said on the third night, hunched over his whiskey at the Lucky Dollar. Came through last winter. Big fellow, scar across his jaw, talked like he was from back east. Stayed at the boarding house for 2 nights, then disappeared. Heard he took work with the judge for a day or two, but nobody knew doing what. You remember his name? Wade asked. Charlie scratched his grizzled chin. Something with a K. Kemp, maybe. Or Kellen. Can't say for sure. It wasn't much, but it was something. Wade rode to the boarding house the next morning and found Mrs. Fletcher, the proprietor, sitting on her porch shelling peas. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who'd run the establishment for 30 years and prided herself on remembering every guest who'd ever darkened her doorway. Kellen, she said immediately when Wade described the man. Jack Kellen. Rough sort, but paid in advance and didn't cause trouble. Said he was passing through on his way to California. She dumped a handful of peas into her bowl. But he never made it that far as I know. Heard he got work at one of the ranches south of here. Which ranch? Couldn't say for certain, but you might ask at the feed store. Those boys know everyone who's hiring. The feed store led Wade to a ranch 40 miles south, where the foreman remembered Kellen working cattle for 3 weeks before vanishing without collecting his final pay. That led to a saloon in a town called Redemption, where a bartender recalled Kellen drinking heavy and talking about money he was owed. And that finally led Wade to a small mining camp in the foothills where Kellen had apparently gone to ground, trying to disappear into hard labor and harder liquor. It took Wade 5 days to track the trail to its end. 5 days of riding through heat that turned the air to liquid, sleeping rough, and following leads that sometimes evaporated like morning dew. But on the 6th day, he rode into the mining camp and asked the first man he saw about a big fellow with a scarred jaw. Kellen? The miner spat tobacco juice into the dust. Yeah, he's here. Works the day shift, drinks away his pay at night. You'll find him at the tent saloon come evening. Wade thanked him and found a place to wait. The camp was a rough collection of tents and crude shacks clinging to the side of a mountain, populated by men who'd run out of options everywhere else. It smelled of sweat and smoke and desperation. The kind of place where questions weren't welcome and the past stayed buried as deep as the silver these men clawed from the rock. But Wade didn't need welcome. He needed answers. The tent saloon was exactly what it sounded like, a large canvas structure with a plank bar and mismatched chairs, lit by kerosene lanterns that threw dancing shadows on the walls. Wade walked in just after sunset and spotted Kellen immediately. He was sitting alone at a back table, a bottle in front of him and a 1,000-yard stare that said he was trying hard to forget something. Wade bought a bottle and 2 glasses and walked over. "Mind if I sit?" Kellen looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and wary. Up close, the scar was more prominent, a thick white line that ran from his left ear to his chin, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-sneer. "Do I know you?" "No, but we have a mutual acquaintance." Wade set the bottle down and poured 2 drinks. "Vernon Crow." Kellen went very still. His hand moved toward his belt where a knife handle protruded, but Wade raised his own hands in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Wade said quietly. "I'm here to talk about a job you did for the judge last winter, a job involving a baby." The color drained from Kellen's face. He grabbed his glass and downed the whiskey in one swallow, then poured another with shaking hands. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You took a newborn baby from Crow's house with instructions to make her disappear. You were supposed to kill her, but you didn't." Wade leaned forward. "You left her in a box out at Willow Creek, and I found her. She's alive, Kellen. That baby is alive." Kellen closed his eyes like he'd been hit. "Jesus," he whispered. "Jesus Christ." "Why'd you do it?" Wade asked. "Why'd you leave her there instead of finishing the job?" "Because I'm not a goddamn murderer," Kellen said hoarsely. "Crow told me to take the baby far away and dispose of it. Said it was a mercy, that the child was born sick and would die anyway. Offered me $500 to save his daughter from having to watch it happen." He laughed bitterly. "I was broke, desperate, stupid. I took the money and I took the baby. Rode out past Willow Creek intending to... I don't know what I intended, but when I looked at her..." His voice cracked. "She was so small. And she looked right at me with these blue eyes like she knew. Like she understood I was supposed to end her, and she was asking me not to." "So you left her in the box," Wade said. "I thought someone would find her. It was near the road, near water. I figured a traveler or a rancher would come by. I told myself I was giving her a chance." Kellen's hands trembled around his glass. "But then I heard nothing, no news of a baby being found, and I thought she must have died anyway, that I'd just made it slower and worse. I've been drinking myself to death ever since trying to forget the sound she made when I put the lid on that box." Wade felt a surge of something that might have been pity if it hadn't been tangled up with fury. "She didn't die. She survived, and now Crow is trying to take her back so he can finish what he paid you to do." Kellen looked up sharply. "He knows she's alive?" "He knows, and he's got lawyers and judges working to put her back in his control. But if you testify about what he hired you to do, we can stop him. We can prove he tried to murder his own grandchild." "Testify?" Kellen laughed harshly. "Against Vernon Crow? I'd be dead before I made it back to Willow Creek. The man has people everywhere. You think he's going to let someone who can destroy him just walk into a courtroom?" "Then what?" Wade demanded. "You just keep running? Keep drinking yourself to death in mining camps? That baby deserves justice, Kellen. She deserves a chance at life. And you're the only one who can give her that." Kellen stared at him for a long moment. Then he refilled both their glasses. "You really think you can beat him? Vernon Crow?" "I think I have to try," Wade said simply, "because if I don't, I'll be no better than him." They sat in silence, the noise of the saloon washing over them, rough laughter, the clink of bottles, the shuffle of cards. Finally, Kellen spoke. "I got a sister in Missouri. 2 little girls. I haven't seen them in 5 years because I'm too ashamed of what I've become." He looked at Wade with haunted eyes. "Maybe this is how I start being someone they wouldn't be ashamed of." "Does that mean you'll testify?" "It means I'll think about it," Kellen said. "But I need guarantees, protection. Crow's reach is long." "Sheriff Brackett is a good man," Wade said. "He'll keep you safe until the hearing. Brackett works for the county. The county pays his salary, and Crow owns most of the county tax base." Kellen shook his head. "I need better than that." Wade thought fast. "What if we go higher? State Marshal's office in Austin. Get them involved. Make this big enough that Crow can't sweep it under the rug." "You got connections in Austin?" "No," Wade admitted, "but I'll find some." Kellen studied him like he was trying to decide if Wade was crazy or just desperate. You're serious about this? About going up against the most powerful man in 3 counties to save one baby? She's not just one baby, Wade said quietly. She's proof that monsters don't get to win just because they're rich and connected. She's proof that some things matter more than power. He met Kellen's eyes. And yeah, I'm serious, deadly serious. Kellen was quiet for another moment. Then he stuck out his hand. All right, I'll do it. But we do this smart. We build the case right, get all our ducks in a row before we make a move. Because if we go at Crow half-cocked, we're both dead, and that baby ends up right back where she started. Wade shook his hand, feeling a weight lift slightly from his chest. It wasn't victory, but it was a chance. He rode back to Willow Creek the next day with Kellen following a mile behind, both of them taking precautions to avoid being seen together. Wade went straight to the sheriff's office and found Brackett reviewing reports, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Wade," Brackett said, looking up in surprise. "Where have you been? Claire's been worried sick." "Finding proof," Wade said. He closed the door and told Brackett everything. Kellen's testimony, Crow's payment, the deliberate attempt to murder an infant. The sheriff listened with growing horror, his expression darkening with each revelation. "If this is true," Brackett said when Wade finished, "we're talking about attempted murder, conspiracy, maybe others involved. This is bigger than a county investigation. That's why we need to go to Austin," Wade said. "Get the state marshal involved. Make this official enough that Crow can't bury it." Brackett rubbed his face. "The hearing is in 2 weeks. Even if I send word today, there's no guarantee Austin will respond in time. And without Kellen's testimony on the record, we've got nothing but hearsay." "Then we make sure Kellen stays alive and talking until the hearing," Wade said. "Can you protect him?" "I can try. But Wade, you need to understand what you're asking. If we go after Vernon Crow with everything we've got, and we fail, the blowback will destroy everyone involved. Me, you, Claire, Kellen, we'll all pay the price." "And if we don't go after him?" Wade asked quietly. "What happens to Maisie then?" Brackett had no answer for that. Wade left the sheriff's office and headed to Claire's house on the edge of town. She answered his knock immediately, her face pale and strained. The moment she saw him, relief flooded her features. "Thank God," she breathed. "I thought, when you didn't come back." "I'm fine," Wade said. "And I found him. The man Crow hired. He's willing to testify." Claire's hand flew to her mouth. "Really? Oh, Wade, that's everything. That's proof." "It's a start," Wade said. "But we need more. We need Maria to corroborate the story. We need medical records if they exist. We need anything that proves Elise gave birth and Crow ordered the baby killed." "Maria won't talk," Claire said, her hope dimming. "She's too afraid." "Then we need to find someone she's not afraid of. Someone she trusts enough to protect her family if she comes forward." Wade paused. "What about the priest? Father Miguel? Doesn't Maria go to confession?" Claire's eyes widened. "Confession is protected. He can't reveal what she tells him." "No, but he can counsel her, encourage her, remind her that silence in the face of evil is its own kind of sin." Wade looked at Claire intently. "You know Father Miguel better than I do. Would he help?" "I don't know," Claire said honestly, "but I can ask." That evening, Claire went to the rectory beside St. Mary's and requested a private meeting with Father Miguel. He was a small man in his 50s with kind eyes and hands worn rough from working in the church garden. He listened to Claire's carefully worded request, never mentioning confession, never asking him to violate his vows, just asking if he might speak to Maria about the weight of carrying terrible secrets. "You're asking me to influence a parishioner's conscience," Father Miguel said gently. "I'm asking you to remind her that protecting evil is not the same as protecting her family," Claire said. "That baby, Maisie, she's innocent, and Maria knows the truth about what was done to her. If Maria stays silent, she's complicit in whatever happens next." Father Miguel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I will pray on this, and I will speak with Maria, but I cannot promise she will find the courage you hope for. Fear is a powerful master." "So is conscience," Claire said. 3 days passed. Wade spent them at the ranch, working cattle and trying not to think about Maisie and that orphanage. Claire visited every day, bringing news and food and the kind of steady presence that kept Wade from drowning in his own anger. They didn't talk much about what would happen if they failed. Some possibilities were too dark to speak aloud. On the fourth day, Sheriff Brackett rode out with news. Maria came to see me this morning. Father Miguel was with her. Brackett's voice held cautious hope. She's willing to testify, on the condition that I personally guarantee her family's safety and help them relocate after the trial. Wade felt his heart kick hard against his ribs. You agreed? I agreed. It'll cost me most of my savings to set them up somewhere new, but yeah, I agreed. Brackett dismounted and tied his horse. We've got 2 witnesses now. That's enough to bring formal charges. I sent word to Austin yesterday. The state marshal's office is sending an investigator. When? Claire asked. Should be here within a week. We'll depose Kellen and Maria, get everything on record, and present it at the custody hearing. If the evidence is strong enough, the judge will have no choice but to rule in your favor and potentially bring criminal charges against Crow. If the judge isn't in Crow's pocket, Wade said. Judge Hamilton signed the removal order, Brackett admitted, but he's not corrupt, just cautious, and he won't ignore sworn testimony from multiple witnesses about attempted murder. The man's ambitious. He won't tie his reputation to a sinking ship. It was the most hope Wade had felt in weeks, but hope, he'd learned, was a dangerous thing. It made you forget how much could still go wrong. The investigator from Austin arrived 6 days later. His name was Daniel Price, a federal marshal who'd been assigned to review the case and determine if charges warranted state intervention. He was 40 years old, square-jawed and sharp-eyed, with the look of a man who'd seen enough corruption to be permanently suspicious of everyone. Price interviewed Kellen first, recording every detail of his interaction with Crow. Then he spoke with Maria, who wept through her entire testimony but held firm. He reviewed medical supplies ordered by the Crow household 9 months prior, tracked down the cook who'd helped with the delivery, and even managed to get a deposition from the man at the feed store who'd sold the wooden crate to one of Crow's ranch hands. This is solid, Price told Wade and Brackett on the eve of the hearing. Multiple witnesses, physical evidence, a clear timeline. Unless Crow can produce an alternative explanation that accounts for all these facts, he's finished. He'll try, Wade said grimly. The man's got more lawyers than I've got cattle. Let him try, Price said. I've taken down senators and railroad barons. Vernon Crow might run this county, but he doesn't run the state of Texas. The custody hearing was set for 10 o'clock the next morning. Wade couldn't sleep the night before. He sat on his porch watching stars wheel overhead and thinking about Maisie. She'd been at that orphanage for 2 weeks now. He wondered if she cried for them, if she remembered their faces, if she thought they'd abandoned her the way everyone else had. The thought made his chest ache. You should rest, Claire said, stepping out onto the porch. She'd stayed at the ranch the last few nights, sleeping in the guest room, both of them too anxious to be alone. Can't, Wade said. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. We're going to get her back. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Claire's voice was fierce. Because we have the truth on our side. And truth has a weight that even Vernon Crow's money can't outweigh. Wade wanted to believe that. But he'd seen too much of the world to trust in justice without proof. They rode to town together at dawn, joining Brackett and Marshal Price at the courthouse. A crowd had already gathered. Word had spread about the hearing, and half of Willow Creek had turned out to watch Vernon Crow face accusations no one had dared voice before. The judge's arrival caused a stir. Judge Hamilton was a severe man in his 60s, with white hair and a reputation for running his courtroom with absolute authority. He took his seat behind the bench and surveyed the packed room with evident displeasure. This hearing will come to order, Hamilton said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. We are here to determine custody of a minor child currently in county care and to address certain allegations that have been brought to this court's attention. Mr. Price, you may proceed. Marshal Price stood and laid out the case with devastating precision. He called Kellen first, who testified about the $500 and the explicit instructions to dispose of an infant. Then Maria, who described the birth and Crow's cold determination to erase his granddaughter. The cook corroborated Maria's account. The feed store owner confirmed the crate sale. Wade watched Crow throughout the testimony. The judge sat in the front row with his lawyer, his face an expressionless mask, but Wade saw the tightness around his eyes, the white-knuckle grip on his walking stick. Crow was a man watching his empire crack. When Price finished presenting evidence, Crow's lawyer stood. His name was Harrison Vance, a slick Austin attorney who probably cost more per hour than most men made in a month. "Your Honor," Vance said smoothly, "these allegations are sensational but unsubstantiated. My client's daughter, Miss Elise Crow, did indeed give birth 9 months ago. However, the child was stillborn. There was no attempted murder because there was no living child to murder." The courtroom erupted. Judge Hamilton banged his gavel. "Order, Mr. Vance, do you have medical evidence to support this claim?" "We have the testimony of Dr. Richard Caldwell, who attended the birth and can confirm the infant was deceased at delivery," Vance said. "Dr. Caldwell wasn't there," Maria cried out. "No doctor came. It was only me and Mrs. Patterson." "The witness is mistaken or lying," Vance said coldly. "Dr. Caldwell will testify under oath that he was present and that the child was born dead." Wade felt his stomach drop. Crow had bought himself a doctor willing to commit perjury. Of course he had, but then Marshal Price smiled. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Caldwell to the stand right now. If his testimony is so vital, let's hear it immediately." Vance's confident expression flickered. "Dr. Caldwell is not available today. He's attending to patients in—" "I have a subpoena that says otherwise," Price interrupted. He pulled a document from his briefcase. "Dr. Caldwell was ordered to appear today. His absence constitutes contempt of court." Judge Hamilton's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Vance, where is your witness?" He must have been delayed. Medical emergency, perhaps?" "Or perhaps he realized that perjury carries serious consequences," Price said. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a sworn statement from Dr. Grant Morrow of Willow Creek, who examined the child when she was found and can attest that she was very much alive. I also have medical records showing the baby's treatment and recovery." The walls were closing in. Wade could see it in Crow's face, the first real flash of fear. "Furthermore," Price continued, "I'd like to call a witness who was not included in my initial filings. Someone whose testimony will eliminate any doubt about these events." "Who?" Hamilton asked. The courtroom doors opened. Every head turned. A young woman walked in, escorted by a deputy. She was small and blonde, with delicate features and eyes that held both terror and determination. She wore a simple gray dress, and her hands shook as she moved down the aisle. Claire gasped. "That's her! That's Elise Crow!" Vernon Crow shot to his feet. "Elise, what are you—" "Sit down, Mr. Crow," Judge Hamilton ordered. Elise reached the witness stand and was sworn in. Her voice was barely audible as she confirmed her name and relationship to the defendant. Then Marshal Price asked the question that would change everything. "Miss Crow, did you give birth to a living child 9 months ago?" Elise looked at her father. Tears streamed down her face. "Yes." The courtroom exploded again. Crow was shouting. His lawyer was objecting. Judge Hamilton was pounding his gavel so hard the handle cracked. "Order! I will have order, or I will clear this courtroom." Silence fell, tense and expectant. "Continue, Miss Crow," Price said gently. "I gave birth to a baby girl," Elise said, her voice growing stronger. "She was alive. She cried. I held her. She looked at her father with something that might have been hatred. And he took her from me. He said she couldn't live, that she would ruin me. I begged him to let me keep her. I said I didn't care about my reputation or my future or anything except my daughter, but he wouldn't listen." "What happened to the baby?" Price asked. "He gave her to a man. I heard them talking. He was supposed to take her away and make sure she was never found. My father told me afterward that she died, that it was a mercy." Elise's voice broke. "But 2 days ago, a maid from our household came to me. She told me my daughter was alive, that she'd been found and saved, and I knew I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him take my child again." "Miss Crow," Price said quietly, "do you know who that man was?" Elise pointed directly at Vernon Crow. "My father, Judge Vernon Crow. He ordered my baby killed." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Judge Hamilton's gavel might as well have been thunder for all the good it did. Vernon Crowe was on his feet screaming at his daughter, calling her ungrateful and hysterical. His lawyer was trying to silence him. People in the gallery were shouting questions and accusations. And through it all, Wade sat frozen, watching a monster's mask finally crack apart. Judge Hamilton finally restored order by threatening to have the bailiff physically remove anyone who spoke out of turn. The silence that followed was electric, charged with the kind of tension that precedes violence or revelation. Vernon Crowe had gone very still, his face pale except for 2 spots of color high on his cheeks. His hands gripped the table in front of him so hard his knuckles had turned white. "Miss Crowe," Judge Hamilton said, his voice carefully controlled, "these are serious allegations against your father. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Your Honor," Elise said. Her tears had stopped, replaced by something harder, something that looked like steel wrapped in silk. "And you're testifying of your own free will? No one has coerced you or threatened you?" "The only person who ever threatened me was my father," Elise said quietly. "He told me if I ever spoke about the baby, he would have me committed to an asylum. He said no one would believe a hysterical girl over a respected judge. But I don't care anymore. My daughter is alive, and I'm done being afraid." Hamilton turned to Vernon Crowe. "Mr. Crowe, you'll have an opportunity to respond to these accusations. But first, I want to hear the rest of Miss Crowe's testimony." He looked back at Elise. "Tell us everything. From the beginning." Elise took a shaky breath and began. She told them about Nate Kellen, not Jack, she corrected, but Nate. A young man she'd met at a church social, kind and honest, and desperately in love with her. They'd planned to marry, but when Vernon Crowe discovered the relationship, he'd paid Nate to leave town, threatened him with violence if he ever contacted Elise again. "I didn't know I was pregnant until after Nate was gone," Elise said. "I tried to find him, but my father controlled everything. My letters, my movements, my entire life. He locked me in the house for months, told everyone I was visiting relatives in Dallas. But I was there the whole time, growing larger, more desperate." She wiped her eyes. "When the labor started, he wouldn't call Dr. Morrow. He said no one in town could know. So it was just Maria and Mrs. Patterson, and they did their best, but I thought I was going to die." "But you didn't," Marshall Price said gently. "No. And when my daughter was born and I heard her cry, I thought maybe it would be all right. I thought my father would see her and love her the way I did. But he didn't. He looked at her like she was a problem to be solved." Elise's voice hardened. "He took her from my arms while I was too weak to fight him. I heard him in the hallway talking to a man. I heard him say, 'Far enough that no one will ever find her,' and 'make it look natural.' I knew what that meant." The courtroom was silent except for Elise's voice and the scratch of the court reporter's pen. Wade looked at Vernon Crowe and saw a man calculating his options, trying to find an angle, a way to spin this into something survivable. "My father came back and told me the baby had died," Elise continued. "He said it was for the best, that she'd been too weak to survive anyway. He made me sign papers saying I agreed to have her buried in an unmarked grave on our property. Then he sent me away to an aunt in Austin for 6 months, while he arranged my engagement to Senator Morrison's son." She looked at her father with something close to contempt. "He thought he could erase her, erase what he'd done. But you can't erase a child. You can't erase murder." "Lies!" Vernon Crowe exploded. He lunged to his feet despite his lawyer's attempts to restrain him. "Everything she's said is lies and delusion. My daughter was traumatized by the stillbirth. She's imagined this entire scenario because she can't accept that the baby died naturally." "Then explain the witnesses who say otherwise," Marshall Price said coldly. "Explain Maria's testimony. Explain Jack Kellen's confession. Explain why your ranch hand bought a wooden crate from the feed store the same night the baby was born." "Circumstantial," Crowe's lawyer shouted. "Your Honor, none of this proves—" "It proves plenty," Judge Hamilton cut him off. "And I've heard enough." He looked at Vernon Crowe with something that might have been discussed. "Mr. Crowe, you're a respected member of this community. A judge yourself. If these allegations are false, now is the time to provide evidence to refute them. Do you have such evidence?" Crowe's mouth worked, but no sound came out. Wade watched the man's mind racing, trying to construct a defense against the truth. Finally, Crow turned to his daughter. "After everything I've done for you," he said, his voice shaking with rage, "I gave you everything, the best schools, the finest clothes, a future with a prominent family, and this is how you repay me? By believing the lies of servants and criminals?" "You tried to kill my daughter," Elise said, each word falling like a hammer. "There's no repayment for that. No forgiveness." Something in Crow snapped. Wade saw it happen, saw the mask of respectability finally shatter completely. "She was a bastard, an embarrassment, a stain on our family name." Crow's voice rose to a shout. "I did what any father would do to protect his daughter's future. That baby had no business existing, no right to destroy everything I've built." The courtroom went absolutely silent. Even Crow's lawyer had gone pale. Judge Hamilton leaned forward. "Mr. Crow, did you just confess to ordering the murder of your granddaughter?" Crow seemed to realize what he'd said. His face went from red to gray in an instant. No, I meant—" "Marshal Price," Hamilton said quietly, "place Mr. Crow under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and child endangerment. I'm also issuing a warrant for Dr. Caldwell on charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice." The bailiff moved forward, but Crow backed away, his eyes wild. "You can't do this. I'm a judge. I have friends in the Capitol, connections that—" "You had connections," Hamilton corrected. "Now you have a jail cell. Bailiff, take him." What happened next happened fast. Crow pulled a small pistol from his coat pocket, a gambler's gun, small and deadly. People screamed. The bailiff drew his own weapon, but before anyone could fire, Wade was moving. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and hit Crow with his shoulder, driving him back into the wall. The pistol clattered to the floor. "No more," Wade said quietly, his forearm pressed against Crow's throat. "No more running, no more threats. You're done." Crow looked at him with pure hatred. "You should have taken my money when you had the chance. You could have been rich. Instead, you're just another fool protecting something worthless." Wade leaned in close enough that only Crow could hear him. "That baby you threw away? She smiled at me yesterday when I visited her at the orphanage. Smiled like the world was good and safe and full of people who loved her. You tried to erase that smile and you failed. That's what worthless looks like on you." The bailiff pulled Wade back and snapped handcuffs on Crow's wrists. As they led him away, Vernon Crow turned and looked at his daughter one last time. Whatever he saw in her face made him flinch. Elise stood watching until her father disappeared through the courthouse doors. Then she sagged, and Claire was there instantly, catching her, supporting her weight. "It's over," Claire murmured. "You were so brave. It's over now." But Judge Hamilton cleared his throat. "We still have the matter of custody to resolve." Wade turned to face the bench, his heart suddenly hammering. This was it, the moment that would determine whether Maisie came home or disappeared into the system. "Mr. Harlan, Mrs. Sutton," Hamilton said, "given the extraordinary circumstances of this case, I'm prepared to grant you temporary custody of the child known as Maisie June, pending a full investigation into permanent guardianship. However," he held up a hand as Wade started to speak, "there are complications. Miss Crow is the child's biological mother. She has legal rights that supersede yours." Elise stepped forward, pulling away from Claire's support. "Your Honor, I gave up my rights when I let my father take her. I was weak and scared, and I failed my daughter. But Mr. Harlan and Mrs. Sutton didn't fail her. They saved her. They fought for her when I couldn't." Her voice broke. "I don't deserve to be her mother. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But they do." "Miss Crow," Hamilton began. "Please," Elise interrupted. "I'm asking you to let them keep her. Let me earn the right to be part of her life. Let me prove I can be strong enough to protect her. But don't take her away from the people who already love her." Hamilton studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at Wade and Claire. "I'm going to make an unusual ruling, joint custody. Miss Crow maintains her parental rights, but Mr. Harlan and Mrs. Sutton are appointed legal guardians with full decision-making authority. Miss Crow will have visitation rights and the opportunity to build a relationship with her daughter. After 1 year, we'll revisit the arrangement and determine permanent custody based on what's in the child's best interest. He paused. Does this seem acceptable to all parties? Yes, Your Honor, Elise said immediately. Wade looked at Claire. She nodded. Yes, Your Honor, Wade said. Then it's settled. The child will be released to Mr. Harlan and Mrs. Sutton today. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sound like finality. Wade and Claire walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunshine. The crowd that had gathered outside surged forward with questions, but Sheriff Brackett and his deputies formed a barrier, giving them space to breathe. Come on, Brackett said. Let's go get Maisie before this circus gets any worse. The ride to the Methodist orphanage took 20 minutes. Wade's hands shook on the reins the entire way. He kept thinking about what Judge Hamilton had said, that Maisie would be released to them today. Today. After 2 weeks of hell and uncertainty, they were bringing her home. The orphanage was a 2-story brick building on the edge of town, run by a stern woman named Mrs. Pritchard, who believed in discipline and scripture in equal measure. She met them at the door with Maisie in her arms, and Wade felt his breath catch. The baby looked different, thinner, paler, with shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her hair had been cut short in a way that made her look almost boyish, and she wore a plain gray dress instead of the cheerful clothes Claire had made for her. But when Maisie saw Wade and Claire, her face transformed. She let out a cry that was half sob, half laugh, and reached for them with both arms. "Mama," she said clearly. "Mama." Claire took her and burst into tears. Maisie patted her face clumsily, making small sounds of distress like she was trying to comfort Claire instead of the other way around. Then she looked at Wade and reached for him too. Wade held them both, feeling something in his chest crack wide open. He'd spent 4 years building walls around his heart, and this baby had demolished them in a matter of weeks. "Let's go home," he said roughly. Mrs. Pritchard handed over a small bag of Maisie's belongings. Not much, just a few clothes and a cloth doll someone had donated. "She's been difficult," the matron said with clear disapproval. "Cries at night, won't eat properly. I hope you can manage her better than we could." "She wasn't difficult," Claire said sharply. "She was grieving. Children grieve too, Mrs. Pritchard. They just don't have words for it yet." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Maisie fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from 2 weeks of stress and fear. Wade drove carefully, avoiding every rut and bump, while Claire held the baby and sang soft songs Wade remembered from his own childhood. When they reached the ranch, the sun was setting in streaks of orange and gold. Wade carried Maisie inside and laid her in the cradle that had been waiting for her, and for the first time in 2 weeks, the house felt like home again. But there was still one piece of unfinished business. 3 days after the hearing, Nate Kellen, not Jack as they'd thought, rode into Willow Creek. He was younger than Wade expected, maybe 25, with honest eyes and the kind of rough hands that came from hard work. He found Elise at the boarding house where she'd taken a room after leaving her father's house. Wade and Claire were there when they met again. Elise had asked them to come, saying she needed witnesses to her own courage, or she might lose it. Nate walked into the boarding house parlor and stopped dead when he saw Elise. She stood slowly, her hands trembling. "I thought you were dead," Nate said, his voice hoarse. "Your father told me you died. Fever. He said if I ever came back, he'd make sure I hung for your murder." "He lied," Elise whispered, "about everything. He paid you to leave, didn't he? $500 and a train ticket west. Said if I loved you, I'd go. Said you deserved better than a ranch hand with no prospects." Nate's voice cracked. "I believed him. I thought I was doing the right thing." "We had a daughter," Elise said. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them for so long they'd built up pressure. "I was pregnant when you left. I had a baby girl." Nate went white. Where is she?" "Here, in Willow Creek. She's alive because of Mr. Harlan and Mrs. Sutton." Elise looked at Wade and Claire. "They saved her when my father tried to have her killed." Wade watched Nate process this information. Watched him go from shock to horror to rage and back to shock again. Finally, Nate said, "Can I see her? Please, I know I have no right, but—" "You have every right," Elise said firmly. "You're her father." They brought Nate out to the ranch the next day. Wade had spent the morning preparing himself for this moment. The moment when Maisie's real parents stepped back into the picture and he and Claire became superfluous. But when Nate knelt in front of Maisie and held out his hand, what Wade felt wasn't jealousy or resentment. It was relief, because Maisie needed more people to love her, not fewer. And Nate looked at her with the same wonder Wade had felt the first time he'd held her. "She has your eyes," Nate said to Elise. "And your stubborn chin," Elise replied, smiling through tears. Maisie studied Nate with serious concentration, then grabbed his finger and tried to stick it in her mouth. Nate laughed, and the sound was young and free and full of hope. Over the next weeks, a new rhythm established itself. Elise and Nate visited regularly, spending hours playing with Maisie, reading to her, learning how to be parents under Wade and Claire's patient guidance. Nate found work at a ranch outside town, saving money. Elise took a job teaching music lessons to children whose parents didn't care about her scandal. And slowly, carefully, they began building a life that included their daughter without erasing the people who'd saved her. Vernon Crow's trial began in August. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from Elise, Maria, Jack Kellen, who turned out to be Nate's brother, sent to find him, the cook, the ranch hand, and a dozen others who came forward once it was safe to speak. Dr. Caldwell was arrested trying to flee to Mexico and eventually confessed to falsifying records in exchange for a reduced sentence. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes. Vernon Crow was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 20 years in the state penitentiary. He was 62 years old. He would likely die in prison. When the verdict was read, Crow showed no emotion. But as they led him away in chains, he looked at Wade one last time. There was no hatred there anymore, just the hollow emptiness of a man who'd lost everything he'd thought defined him. Wade felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just a quiet certainty that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. The investigation into Crow's affairs revealed corruption that reached deeper than anyone had suspected. Bribes, land fraud, cases thrown in exchange for political favors. More than a dozen public officials were implicated. Some resigned in disgrace. Others faced charges of their own. Willow Creek spent the rest of that year trying to rebuild its reputation and its institutions. Sheriff Brackett was appointed temporary judge until a proper election could be held. Marshal Price stayed on for months, untangling the web of corruption Crow had woven. And through it all, Wade and Claire raised Maisie. They taught her to walk, to say more words than just mama, to laugh at the chickens pecking in the yard. They watched her grow stronger and healthier, watched the shadows fade from her eyes. One evening in late September, Wade stood on his porch watching the sunset while Maisie played at his feet. She'd found a stick and was very seriously poking at the dirt, talking to herself in that half-language toddlers speak. Claire came out and stood beside him. "Elise and Nate asked me something today," she said quietly. "What's that?" "They want to get married, and they want to know if we'd stand up with them, as witnesses." Wade looked at her. "What did you say?" "I said yes, but Wade," she hesitated. "They also asked if we'd consider making the custody arrangement permanent. They want Maisie to have 4 parents instead of 2. They want to raise her together, all of us, as a family." Wade thought about that, about the ranch house with enough rooms for everyone, about holidays around a table full of voices and laughter, about Maisie growing up surrounded by people who'd fought for her, who'd refused to let her be erased. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think it's unconventional," Claire said. "I think people will talk. I think it's going to be complicated and messy and probably difficult sometimes." She smiled. "And I think it's exactly what Maisie deserves." Wade looked down at the baby playing in the dirt. She'd found a beetle and was watching it with intense fascination, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Then let's do it," he said. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. They stood that way as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Maisie abandoned the beetle and crawled over to Wade, pulling herself up on his leg with determination. "Up," she demanded. Wade picked her up and settled her on his hip. She immediately grabbed his nose and squeezed, giggling when he pretended it hurt. "You know what the best part is?" Claire said softly. "Vernon Crow tried to make her disappear, tried to erase her like she was nothing. But look at her now. Look at all the people who love her, who do anything to protect her. He wanted to make her invisible, and instead she became the center of everything. Wade looked at Maisie, at her blue eyes and blonde hair, and the smile that could light up a room. He thought about the day he'd found her in that box, dying in the Texas heat. He thought about the journey from that moment to this one, all the fear and fury and desperate hope. "She's not invisible," Wade said quietly. "She never was. We just had to fight like hell to make sure everyone else could see her too." Maisie yawned and tucked her head against Wade's shoulder, her small hand curling in his shirt. Within minutes, she was asleep, trusting and safe. And Wade Harlan, who'd thought his heart had died in a fire 4 years ago, felt it beating steady and strong. Because some things were worth fighting for. Some things were worth protecting at any cost. And some small miracles, wrapped in sunburned skin and stubborn will, could teach a broken man how to be whole again. The wedding took place on a Saturday in October when the heat had finally broken and the first cool winds of autumn swept across the Texas plains. Elise and Nate were married in the small church at the edge of Willow Creek, the same church where Maria went to morning mass, and where Father Miguel had counseled her to speak the truth that had saved them all. Wade stood beside Nate at the altar, wearing the same suit he'd worn to the custody hearing. Claire stood beside Elise in a blue dress she'd sewn herself, holding Maisie on her hip. The baby wore white lace and kept trying to eat the ribbon tied around her waist, completely oblivious to the significance of the moment. The church was half full. Many in Willow Creek had turned their backs on Elise after the trial, unable to forgive her for exposing Vernon Crow and bringing shame to the town's most prominent family. But the people who mattered were there. Sheriff Brackett sat in the third pew with Maria and her family. Dr. Morrow was there, and Mrs. Fletcher from the boarding house, and a handful of others who'd found the courage to stand with the truth instead of comfortable lies. Father Miguel performed the ceremony in both English and Spanish, his voice steady and warm. When he asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence was absolute. No one dared, not after everything these two had survived to reach this moment. Nate's hands shook when he slipped the simple gold band onto Elise's finger. She steadied them with her own, and Wade saw her whisper something that made Nate smile through his tears. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Father Miguel said. "What has been joined together in love and tested by fire, let no one tear asunder." The kiss was gentle and brief, but it held a promise that Wade recognized. The same promise he'd made to himself the day he pulled Maisie from that box, that some things were worth protecting no matter the cost. The reception was held at Wade's ranch. Claire and Elise had spent days preparing food, and the tables groaned under the weight of roasted chicken, fresh bread, potato salad, and 3 different pies. Someone brought a fiddle, and another man produced a harmonica, and soon music filled the air. Maisie was passed from person to person like a small, giggling treasure. She'd learned to say more, and used it constantly, demanding more food, more music, more attention. When Sheriff Brackett made her laugh by pretending to pull coins from her ears, she shrieked, "More!" so loudly that the chickens scattered in alarm. Wade found himself standing at the edge of the celebration, watching the people he'd come to think of as family. Elise was dancing with Nate, her head on his shoulder, swaying to music only they could hear. Claire was teaching Maisie to clap in rhythm. Maria was laughing at something Dr. Morrow said, her earlier fear replaced by the kind of peace that came from finally being free of terrible secrets. "You look thoughtful," a voice said beside him. Wade turned to find Marshall Price, who'd made the journey from Austin specifically for the wedding. "Just thinking about how much has changed in 4 months." "More than changed," Price said. "You tore down an empire built on lies and replaced it with something honest. That's rare, Wade. Rarer than you might think. It wasn't just me." "No, but you started it. You could have taken Crow's money and walked away. Most men would have." Price took a sip of his drink. "Instead, you chose the hard path, the right path. That matters." Wade didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration unfold. Later, when the sun had set and lanterns cast warm pools of light across the yard, Nate stood and called for quiet. The music stopped. People turned to listen. "I want to thank everyone for coming," Nate said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. Elise and I know that our story hasn't been easy for this town to accept. We know people have judged us, and maybe they're right to. We made mistakes. We were young and foolish, and we didn't think about consequences. He paused, looking at Maisie in Claire's arms. But if those mistakes led to her, then I can't regret them. I can only be grateful. Elise stood beside her husband. We also want to thank the two people who saved our daughter when we couldn't. Wade Harlan and Claire Sutton fought for Maisie when fighting seemed impossible. They protected her, loved her, and refused to let her disappear. Her voice broke slightly. We can never repay that debt, but we can honor it by making sure Maisie grows up knowing she has 4 parents who love her, 4 people who will protect her, 4 people who believe she's worth every battle. She looked at Wade and Claire. So we're asking, in front of all these witnesses, will you consent to a permanent arrangement? Will you be Maisie's guardians, officially and legally, alongside us? Wade felt every eye in the yard turn to him. He looked at Claire, who had tears streaming down her face. She nodded. Yes, Wade said simply. Of course we will. The crowd erupted in applause. Maisie, startled by the noise, burst into tears. Claire soothed her while Elise and Nate crossed the yard to embrace them both. And for a moment they were all tangled together, 4 adults and 1 crying baby who had no idea she was the reason all these people were celebrating. Thank you, Elise whispered. Thank you for giving me the chance to be her mother. Thank you for trusting us to help raise her, Claire replied. They broke apart, and Wade saw that Nate was crying too. The young man wiped his eyes roughly. I need to say something else, Nate said. Something I should have said weeks ago. He turned to face Jack Kellen, who stood at the edge of the crowd, looking uncomfortable in clothes that were too clean and too new. Jack, Nate said, you saved my daughter's life. When Crow paid you to kill her, you couldn't do it. You gave her a chance, even though it meant carrying guilt that nearly destroyed you. He crossed to his brother and gripped his shoulders. I forgive you, for taking Crow's money, for not finding me sooner, for all of it. And I'm asking everyone here to forgive you too, because without you, Maisie would be dead. Jack looked stunned. Nate, I don't deserve— None of us deserve the grace we're given, Nate interrupted, but we receive it anyway. That's what makes it grace. Jack's face crumpled. The two brothers embraced, and Wade heard Jack's muffled apology repeated over and over. Nate just held him tighter. The celebration continued late into the night. Children ran wild in the darkness, playing games only they understood. Adults talked and laughed and told stories that grew more exaggerated with each retelling. Someone claimed Wade had broken down the courthouse door with his bare hands. Someone else swore Claire had threatened Judge Hamilton with eternal damnation if he didn't give Maisie back. Wade didn't bother correcting them. Let the stories grow, let them become legend. The truth was dramatic enough, but legends had a power of their own. They reminded people that ordinary folks could do extraordinary things when the stakes were high enough. Around midnight, most of the guests had gone home. Only the core group remained: Wade, Claire, Elise, Nate, Sheriff Brackett, Maria, Dr. Morrow, and Father Miguel. They sat around the fire Wade had built, passing around what was left of the whiskey and watching sparks drift up toward the stars. Maisie had finally crashed, sleeping soundly in a nest of blankets near Claire's chair. Her face was sticky with pie. Her dress was grass-stained, and she clutched a wooden horse someone had carved for her. She looked utterly content. What happens now? Elise asked quietly. To the town, I mean, after everything that came out about my father. Rebuilding, Brackett said. We've got a special election next month for judge. 3 candidates, all of them promising transparency and reform. We'll see if any of them mean it. What about the people he hurt? Nate asked. The ones who lost land or businesses or worse because Crow wanted them gone. Some of them are filing civil suits against his estate, Brackett said. The house on the hill is being seized to pay debts and restitution. His bank accounts are frozen. Whatever's left after the lawsuits will go to the county orphanage and the church fund for widows. He paused. It's not enough. Nothing could be enough. But it's something. And Crow himself? Wade asked. Transferred to the state penitentiary last week, Brackett said. He'll serve out his sentence there. I heard he's already trying to work deals, calling in favors, acting like he still has power. The sheriff shook his head. He doesn't. He's just another old man in a cell now, counting down days until he dies. Wade thought about that, thought about the man who tried to erase Maisie being slowly erased himself. There was a symmetry to it that felt almost like poetry. "I saw him once," Maria said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her, before they took him away. "He asked to see me. I don't know why I went, but I did." She stared into the fire. "He wanted me to tell him I forgave him. Said he'd only been trying to protect his family, that I should understand. I have children too." "What did you say?" Claire asked. "I told him that protecting your family doesn't mean destroying someone else's, that what he called protection was really just pride and cruelty wearing a mask." Maria's voice was steady. "And I told him I hoped he had many, many years to think about the baby he threw away and the lives he tried to ruin." "Good," Dr. Morrow said quietly. "He deserves no comfort." They fell silent, listening to the fire crackle and the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The wind rustled through the grass with a sound like whispered secrets. "I've been thinking," Claire said, breaking the silence, "about what we do next. The four of us." She gestured at Wade, Elise, and Nate. "We can't all live in separate houses. Maisie needs stability, routine. She needs to know where home is." "What are you suggesting?" Elise asked. "I'm suggesting we make this official, build something permanent." Claire looked at Wade. "Your ranch is big enough. We could add on to the house, create space for everyone, live together as a real family instead of pretending we're separate people who just happen to care for the same child." Wade felt his heart kick against his ribs. "You want to live here? All of us?" "I want Maisie to have what we couldn't give our own children," Claire said softly. "A home full of people who love her, multiple voices reading her bedtime stories, different hands teaching her to ride and cook and read. I want her to grow up so surrounded by family that she never, ever feels alone." "It's unconventional," Nate said carefully. "So is everything else we've done," Elise pointed out. She looked at her husband. "But I like it. I like the idea of building something new, something that doesn't fit the old rules, because the old rules led to babies in boxes and fathers who'd rather commit murder than face scandal." "I'm in," Nate said. "If Wade agrees?" Everyone looked at Wade. He stared at the fire, thinking about the house he'd built for a family that had burned, thinking about empty rooms he'd avoided for 4 years because they hurt too much to enter, thinking about how Claire's presence had started to fill those spaces with warmth again, and how Elise's laughter and Nate's quiet strength had turned the ranch from a tomb into something that felt almost like hope. "We'll need more bedrooms," he said finally, "and a bigger kitchen. Claire's pies take up half the oven." Claire laughed, and the sound was pure joy. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," Wade confirmed. "Let's build something permanent." The construction started in November. Nate proved to be surprisingly skilled with hammer and saw, and Wade taught him the finer points of framing and roofing. They added 2 bedrooms to the east side of the house and expanded the kitchen into a space large enough for a table that could seat 8. Claire and Elise chose paint colors and curtain fabric, arguing cheerfully about whether blue or yellow was more cheerful for Maisie's room. In the end, they compromised on green with yellow trim, and when Maisie saw it for the first time, she clapped her hands and said, "Pretty," which settled the debate forever. The work was slow but steady. They couldn't afford to hire help, so they did it themselves, learning as they went. There were mistakes, walls that weren't quite square, doors that stuck, windows that leaked during the first rain. But they fixed each problem together, and the house began to transform. By Christmas, the addition was finished. They celebrated with a feast that lasted all day, and Maisie opened presents that included a rocking horse from Wade, a rag doll from Claire, a music box from Elise, and a carved wooden train from Nate. She played with the boxes and wrapping paper instead, which made everyone laugh until their sides hurt. That night, after Maisie had been tucked into bed in her new room, the 4 adults sat in the expanded kitchen drinking coffee and watching snow fall outside the window. It was rare to get snow in this part of Texas, and it felt like a blessing. "I've been thinking about next steps," Elise said. "Legal steps. We should formalize the guardianship arrangement, draw up papers that make it official." "Agreed," Wade said. "And we should think about what happens if something goes wrong, if one of us dies or becomes incapacitated. Maisie needs to know she's protected no matter what. They spent the next weeks working with a lawyer from Austin, not one of Crow's botmen, but someone Marshall Price recommended. The documents were complex, creating a legal framework that had never quite existed before. 4 parents with equal rights and responsibilities. A web of protection so strong that no single person could tear it apart. When they signed the papers in late January, almost exactly a year after Wade had found Maisie in that box, it felt like sealing a promise. Not just to Maisie, but to each other. They were family now. Not by blood or tradition, but by choice and by battle. Spring came early that year. The drought finally broke with rains that lasted 3 days and turned the brown grass green almost overnight. The ranch came back to life. Wildflowers bloomed in carpets of blue and yellow. The cattle grew fat on fresh grazing. The creek ran clear and cold. And Maisie, who turned 2 years old in April, discovered the joy of mud puddles. Wade found her one morning covered head to toe in wet earth, sitting in the middle of a puddle and laughing like a maniac. Claire was trying to scold her, but couldn't stop smiling. Elise was taking pictures with a camera Nate had saved up to buy, and Nate was already running a bath knowing they'd need it. "She's going to be a handful," Claire said, watching Maisie try to eat a handful of mud. "She already is," Wade replied, but he was smiling too. That summer, visitors started arriving at the ranch, people who'd heard the story and wanted to see for themselves. Some came from curiosity, others from genuine interest in how this unconventional family worked. Wade and Claire and Elise and Nate welcomed them all, because Maisie needed to know that different didn't mean wrong. One visitor in particular stood out, a woman named Sarah Brennan from a town 200 miles north. She arrived on a Tuesday in July with a baby boy in her arms and desperation in her eyes. "I heard what you did," Sarah said, "how you fought for that little girl. I need help. My husband, he's not a good man. He's threatened to take my son, and I'll never see him again. I don't have money or connections or anything except this baby and the will to protect him." Wade looked at Claire. She looked at Elise. They all looked at Nate. Then Wade said, "Come inside. Let's hear your story." They listened for 3 hours. Then they made some calls. Sheriff Brackett, Marshall Price, the lawyer in Austin, a network that had formed around Maisie's case, people who'd seen what was possible when good folks refused to look away from injustice. 2 weeks later, Sarah Brennan had legal custody of her son, a restraining order against her husband, and a job at the general store in Willow Creek. She rented a room at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house and started building a new life. She wasn't the last. Over the next year, more people came. A grandfather fighting for visitation rights. A young mother escaping an abusive situation. A couple trying to adopt despite town prejudice against their mixed marriage. Each time, Wade and his unconventional family did what they could. Sometimes that meant legal help. Sometimes it meant a safe place to stay. Sometimes it just meant witnessing someone's pain and saying, "We believe you." The ranch became known for this. A place where people who didn't fit the normal molds could find acceptance, where unconventional families were celebrated instead of condemned, where children's welfare mattered more than scandal or reputation. And through it all, Maisie grew. She learned to run and climb and ask why about everything. She learned that she had 4 people who would read her stories, 4 people who would kiss her scraped knees, 4 people who would tuck her in at night. On her 3rd birthday, they had a party that filled the ranch with children and laughter. Maisie wore a yellow dress and a crown made of daisies. She blew out her candles with help from all 4 of her parents, and when she made her wish, Wade wondered what a child who'd been thrown away and fought for and loved back to wholeness could possibly wish for. Later, when the guests had gone and Maisie was asleep, Wade walked out to the place where he'd found her. The grass was tall and green now, fed by good rains and better times. The creek ran clear. Nothing about this place looked like the scene of almost murder. But Wade remembered. He remembered the heat and the crying and the wooden box. He remembered thinking he was too late. He remembered Maisie's blue eyes looking at him with desperate trust. "Thought I'd find you here," Claire said, appearing beside him. "Just thinking," Wade said. "About?" "About how close we came to losing her. If I'd ridden a different fence line that day, if I'd been an hour later, if I'd dismissed the sound as a coyote and moved on." Wade shook his head. All the tiny choices that had to align perfectly for her to survive. Or maybe it wasn't choices, Claire said quietly. Maybe it was meant to be. Maybe you were supposed to find her because you were the one who could save her. Wade didn't know if he believed in destiny or fate or divine providence, but he believed in this, that some moments changed everything, that some choices defined who you were, that some battles had to be fought no matter the cost. She changed me, Wade said. I was dead inside before her, just going through motions, but she made me feel again, made me care again. She changed all of us, Claire agreed. She slipped her hand into his. And now we get to watch her grow up, get to see what kind of person she becomes. A child who knows she's loved beyond measure, who knows that family isn't about blood or convention, but about showing up and refusing to give up. They stood there as the sun set, hands linked, thinking about the future. About Maisie's first day of school and her first loose tooth and her first heartbreak and all the 1,000 moments that would come. About being there for all of it. About being family. A year later, almost to the day after Wade found Maisie, the four parents sat down with her at the kitchen table. She was old enough now to understand, or at least to begin to understand. Maisie, Wade said gently, we want to tell you a story about you. Story, Maisie said excitedly. She loved stories. Once upon a time, Claire began, there was a very bad man who did a very bad thing. He tried to make a little baby disappear, but some good people found that baby and saved her. The baby was you, Elise said, her voice soft, and the good people are all of us. We fought for you, Nate added. We fought very hard because you're special and important and loved. Maisie looked around at their faces, her expression serious. Bad man hurt me? He tried, Wade said, but he failed. Because you're stronger than he ever understood, and because we'll never let anyone hurt you. Never ever? Maisie asked. Never ever, all four of them said together. Maisie thought about this. Then she smiled, her blue eyes bright. I love you. We love you too, Maisie June, Claire said, pulling her into a hug. More than all the stars in the sky. The years passed. Maisie grew into a strong, confident child who knew her own mind and wasn't afraid to speak it. She learned to ride horses from Wade, to cook from Claire, to sing from Elise, and to build things from Nate. She learned that family came in all shapes and sizes, and that love was stronger than scandal or judgment or fear. When she was 7, she came home from school crying because another child had called her family weird. Wade found her in the barn, sitting in the hay and wiping angry tears from her face. Tell me what happened, Wade said, sitting beside her. Maisie explained through hiccups. Tommy said I'm weird because I have 4 parents. He said it's wrong, and I'm going to go to hell. Wade felt old anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. What did you say to Tommy? I said he's stupid, and I ran away, Maisie admitted. Okay, first, we don't call people stupid, even when they're being unkind. Second, running away doesn't solve problems. Wade put his arm around her. But third, and most important, there's nothing wrong with our family. We're different, yes, but different isn't bad. Different is just different. Tommy said normal families have one mama and one daddy. Some families do, Wade agreed. But some families have 2 mamas or 2 daddies or grandparents raising kids or aunts and uncles or any combination you can imagine. Family isn't about following rules. It's about people who love each other and take care of each other. Even if other people think it's weird. Especially then, Wade said firmly. Maisie, do you remember the story we told you about the bad man who tried to make you disappear? Yes. He thought you should disappear because you didn't fit his idea of normal. But you know what? Normal is overrated. You're extraordinary. And our family is extraordinary because we chose each other. We fought for each other. That's worth more than any normal. Maisie leaned against him. I'm glad you found me. Me too, baby girl. Me too. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Wade? Yeah? When I grow up, I'm going to help kids like me. Kids who don't fit normal. I'm going to make sure they know they're not weird. They're just special. Wade felt his throat tighten. I think that's a wonderful plan. And she did. Years later, when Maisie was grown with children of her own, she opened a home for kids who didn't fit the system, kids from unconventional families or no families at all. Kids who needed someone to fight for them the way Wade and Claire and Elise and Nate had fought for her. But that was years in the future. For now, she was just a little girl sitting in a barn with the man who'd pulled her from death and taught her what family really meant. On the anniversary of the day Wade found Maisie, the whole family gathered at Willow Creek. It had become tradition, a way to remember and honor the journey they'd taken together. They stood at the spot where the box had been, which was now marked with a simple stone. The inscription read, "Here a child was lost. Here a family was found." Maisie, now 8 years old, placed wildflowers on the stone. "Thank you for finding me," she said. "Thank you for fighting to stay alive," Wade replied. They held hands, all 5 of them in a circle, and stood in silence, remembering the fear and the fury and the desperate hope that had brought them to this moment. Then Maisie tugged on Wade's hand. "Can we go home now?" "Yeah," Wade said, smiling. "Let's go home." They walked back to the wagon together, Maisie skipping ahead while the adults followed at a slower pace. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, wild and beautiful and free. "Do you ever think about him?" Claire asked quietly. "Crow." "About what he's thinking now?" "Sometimes," Wade admitted. "I heard he died last month. Heart attack in his cell." "Did you feel anything?" Elise asked. "When you heard?" Wade thought about that. "Relief, maybe, that he can't hurt anyone else, but mostly I just felt nothing. He's not worth the energy it takes to hate him." "He tried to destroy us," Nate said. "All of us." "And he failed," Wade replied. "We're still here. We're still standing. We're still a family. That's the best revenge, living well despite everything he did to try to stop us." They reached the wagon. Wade lifted Maisie into the back where she immediately curled up on the blankets and yawned. "Tell me the story again," she mumbled, her eyes already drooping. "About the day you found me." "You've heard it 100 times," Claire said, climbing in beside her. "I want to hear it 100 more," Maisie insisted. So Wade told the story one more time, about the heat and the crying and the wooden box, about a baby who refused to die, about 4 people who learned that family wasn't about perfection or convention, but about showing up and refusing to let go. By the time he finished, Maisie was asleep, a smile on her face. They drove home through the gathering darkness, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically. The ranch house appeared on the horizon, lights blazing in every window. Home. Wade helped carry Maisie inside and tucked her into bed. Her room was full of the things that made her who she was, books and toys and drawings of horses and families with too many people in them. "Good night, Maisie June," Wade whispered, kissing her forehead. "Sleep well." He joined the others in the kitchen, where Elise was making coffee and Nate was cleaning up from dinner. Claire stood at the window, looking out at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked her. "About how far we've come," Claire said. "About all the people we've helped because we learned how to fight for Maisie. About the ripples spreading out from one act of courage." "Finding her wasn't courage," Wade said. "It was just being in the right place." "No," Claire said firmly. "Finding her was luck. Saving her was courage. Fighting Crow was courage. Building this family when everyone said it was wrong, that was courage too." Wade supposed she was right. It had taken courage to stand up to the most powerful man in the county, to risk everything for a child who wasn't his by blood or law, to open his heart again after thinking it was permanently closed. "We should be proud," Elise said, joining them at the window, "of what we've built, of who we've become." "I am proud," Nate said. "Every single day." They stood together, the 4 of them looking out at the land they'd turned into sanctuary. The ranch that had started as Wade's tomb and become their shared home. The place where Maisie would grow up safe and loved and whole. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The world kept turning, indifferent to human struggle and triumph. But inside this house, 4 people who'd chosen to become family held tight to what they'd built. They'd taken something broken. A thrown-away baby, a grief-hollowed man, a lonely widow, a shamed young couple, and made it whole again. That was the real miracle. Not that Maisie had survived, though that was miracle enough, but that they'd all survived. That they'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate pains and built something beautiful. Vernon Crow had wanted to erase Maisie because she didn't fit his perfect picture, but in trying to destroy her, he'd created something far more powerful than he could have imagined. A family bound not by convention, but by battle. A love forged in fire and tested by the worst humanity could offer. And in the end, that love had won. The baby thrown away in a wooden box had become the center of something extraordinary. 4 parents who would die for her. A community that rallied around her. A legacy of helping others that would extend far beyond these walls. Wade Harlan looked at his family, and yes, they were his family in every way that mattered, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of forgetting or moving on, but the peace of having fought the good fight and won. The peace of knowing that when the moment came, when everything was on the line, he'd chosen right. He'd chosen love over money. He'd chosen truth over comfort. He'd chosen a baby's life over a powerful man's pride. And in making those choices, he'd found his way back to being human again. "Come on," Claire said, breaking the silence. "Let's sit down. I made pie." "You always make pie," Nate laughed. "That's because pie makes everything better," Claire replied. They gathered around the table, the one they'd built together, large enough for the family they'd become and the family they'd continue to grow. They ate pie and drank coffee and talked about everything and nothing, about Maisie's upcoming school play, about the new horse Wade was training, about Elisa's plans to start music lessons for the neighborhood children. Normal things. Everyday things. The things that made up a life. And later, when everyone had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Wade stood one last time on his porch, looking out at the darkness. He thought about the journey from that terrible day in July to this peaceful night in spring, about all the battles fought and won, about all the ways a single choice could change everything. Somewhere in her room, Maisie June slept safe and sound, dreaming whatever children dream. She would wake tomorrow surrounded by people who loved her. She would grow up knowing she was wanted, protected, cherished. She would never know the fear of being disposable, because Wade Harlan had found her in the tall grass and refused to let her go. And that, in the end, was the whole story. A story about a baby left to die who lived instead, about a broken man who found purpose again, about 4 people who became family against all odds, about choosing love over fear, truth over lies, and courage over comfort, about the power of refusing to look away when the world would rather you did. Wade Harlan stood on his porch and smiled at the stars. The story had a happy ending after all.